हम्म, हम्म, हम्म,
गेम मंडी इस्माइल का।
हम्म, हम्म। हाँ हाँ ठीक है, कोई दिक्कत नहीं। तू अभी आगे जो आगे आगे बहुत अच्छी अपॉर्चुनिटी आने वाली है एनपीएससी के चक्कर में, तू हाई कोर्ट पकड़ के रखियो, किसी और के हाथ में मत जा।
Very good morning, all of you. Thanks to for taking out a little bit of time from all of your schedule and making yourselves available for this session. So today, first of all, I should convey my sincere thanks to Mr. Samir Pal, Member Bar Council of West Bengal, and my one of my closest friends, Mr. Jagriti Mishra, for taking this initiative. So that we can all utilize our the lockdown in a more productive way. So while choosing a topic, I thought of this topic because in view of the lockdown which has been enforced by the government in the wake of COVID-19, I believe soon after the lockdown reopens or even during the lockdown, there will be several legal disputes touching upon this issue. First of all. Secondly, we have already seen that this issue has already cropped up. There are two judgments staring at our face right now, one of the Delhi High Court and one by the Bombay High Court. I'll come to that. Now, while discussing this topic in today's session, what I intend to do is, I'll first give a basic conceptual clarity, definition, the import and purport of the doctrine of frustration, the meaning and import of force majeure, and then thereafter we'll slowly move on to see how the law has evolved in the jurisdiction of England, how the English courts have developed the doctrine, how Indian law is different, what are the judgments that has come in place by our Supreme Court and other courts. And then we'll come to the statutory provisions, and I'll refer to some of the leading case laws to give a clarity, a factual clarity as to how this topic should be understood. Now, first of all, I'd like to take all of you to a basic definition of what force majeure is all about. Now, if you can see, the Black's Law Dictionary provides a particular definition. It says it's an event or effect that can be neither anticipated nor controlled. It's a contractual provision allocating the risk of loss if performance becomes impossible or impracticable, especially as a result of an event that the parties could not have anticipated or controlled. The Cambridge Dictionary also defines it in a similar manner. Participants who are from legal background, we are more or less conversant with what the doctrine is all about. It's something, in layman terms, it's something which makes performance of a contract impossible or impracticable. That's the layman's meaning. Now, this concept was in existence since long. It developed in French law in the 14th century or even earlier. In the Napoleonic Code also we find reference to a concept like this. But in the common law system, it has evolved in a series of case laws by the judges, the statutes, and other judicial interpretations. Now, in the common law system, it has evolved from one of physical impossibility to frustration of purpose, and in the present context, to some extent, you can say commercial impracticability also. Now, force majeure, as we see, it doesn't have a very straitjacket definition or meaning. It basically covers or governs circumstances that are not within a contracting party's reasonable control. Once a contract comes into force, there are few things which parties can contemplate, and there are many other things which parties cannot. Now, force majeure basically covers those issues which are not contemplated at the time when the contract was executed. Now, another aspect is that while drafting a contract, we have seen several kinds of force majeure clauses. We'll come to that. What are the important purport of those clauses? How relevant are those clauses? How courts have interpreted those clauses? Now, at the outset, this is one decision, Lebupin, 1920 King's Bench. This, I would suggest each one of us who are further interested in this topic, or whenever a litigation comes up touching upon this topic, this is a judgment which is a must read. This actually forms the entire, this actually captures, the judgment captures, Justice McCurdy's judgment captures the entire concept, history, and purport of the term force majeure and the doctrine of frustration. This is a wonderful judgment. This defines force majeure with all its characteristics, what are the exceptions, and how subjective the clause can be, and what are the situations when the court must exercise its discretion. Now, the judgment basically says, I have just touched upon 2-3 things here. It's not possible to make an entire thorough analysis of the judgment within this short period of time. It says that force majeure is basically a term of wide import. It should be construed in each and every case with a close attention to the words which precede or follow the clauses. Due regard must be had to the nature and general terms of the contract. The effect of the clause may vary with each instrument. It can vary with each circumstances. It can vary upon the intention of the parties. It can vary upon the objectives of the contract and many other things, anything and everything which comes while interpreting a contract. Each and every factor is important. Now, what are the relevance of each of those factors? We'll discuss this a little later. That is very important. Now, in common parlance, there is a misconception. Many a times we confuse the concept of force majeure with that of act of God. That is more or less, we call it vis majeure. Now, act of God basically implies all causes of an inevitable accident to be occasioned by elementary forces of nature, not connected with any agency of man on any other cause, directly or indirectly. It basically takes into account, for example, a catastrophic earthquake, devastating flood. It's basically forces or factors which are beyond the control of human agency. Whereas force majeure is a slightly wider term. Apart from natural forces upon which human has no control, it also takes into account each and everything where a human is involved. anything which has a connection with human agency is also included in the term force majeure, and in that sense, force majeure is something which is a wider term than that of vis majeure. Now, having said that, it's basically how the rule is applied. Now, at the outset, there are few legal doctrines. It depends how we use it. Sometimes we use it as a sword, sometimes we use it as a shield. Now, doctrine of force majeure is basically a shield. It's a subjective defense. It defends a contracting party in saying that, see, this is why I have failed to discharge my contractual obligations. To that extent, to that effect, in that view, it's a subjective defense, but definitely it's not a blanket defense. There are many other things which requires to be proved in order to invoke the doctrine and to successfully resist the claim of a contracting party. Now, it's a rule of positive law. Why so? Why is it so? Why this is a rule of positive law? I'll explain it a little later when I refer to the seminal decision of Justice B.K. Mukherjee delivered in Satyabrata Ghosh versus Mungilal Bangur and Company. That decision is one of the most important decisions on this topic. I'll come back to that later. Now, basically, in a general understanding, what are the factors which requires to be proved while invoking the doctrine? First of all, occurrence of an event which is referred to in the clause of a contract or which might not have been referred to in the clause. There are two differences. If referred to the clause, if not referred to the contract, there are two different situations. How to handle with this, I'll come back to that later. Second, that the party's performance of the contract has been prevented, hindered, or delayed, as the case may be, depending upon the wording of the clause, as a result of the event. And that the party's non-performance was due to circumstances beyond his or her control, and that there were no reasonable steps he or she could have taken to avoid or mitigate the event or its consequences. Now, these four things, even from a layman's point of view, one can understand, but practically it's not so easy. While I refer to the case laws in the coming slides, one would get to understand how the practical difficulties crop up in interpreting and applying this doctrine. Now, before coming to the Indian context, I thought it appropriate that we must have a look as to how the law has developed in the United Kingdom or by the British courts. Now, 1863, when Taylor versus Caldwell was decided, prior to that, all along, English courts have followed the rule of strict construction. Once a contract has been executed, come what may, it has to be performed. Any kind of non-performance, any kind of deviation, any kind of non-compliance invites a cause of action for the other contracting party to invoke the other clauses, other compensatory clauses, the clauses for damages, clauses for rescission, novation, or supersession of the contract or discharge of liability, etc. So basically there was a rule of strict construction. In 1863, Taylor versus Caldwell was decided. It was a case where there was a contract between one party and another for renting out a music hall. There's a hall where there was supposed to be a concert which was to be held in that hall. Now, few days prior to the event, the hall was pulled down by fire. There's an incident of devastating fire, the hall goes. Now the question comes, how far the party who had rented out the music hall was under an obligation to compensate the other contracting party for the loss that he had suffered by reason of not having the hall in existence. Now the subject matter of the contract, which was essential for the performance of the contract, goes away. In Taylor versus Caldwell, Justice Blackburn delivered a judgment which brought in force the rule of frustration of contract. Justice Blackburn says that when a contract is being entered, there are always many terms and conditions which, even though not specifically mentioned in the contract, are of utmost importance while performing the contract. For example, the existence of the music hall was one of the prerequisites which was essential for performance of the contract. Justice Blackburn says, even though such conditions are not mentioned in the contract, it has to be implied that those conditions were already there in the contract. Therefore, he propounds the doctrine of implied condition, which means that today if a supplier enters into a contract for supplying of steel, say from Singapore to India, now this contract, according to the doctrine of implied condition, presupposes that there must be circumstances or conditions which would be conducive for supply of steel and supply of such steel which was in terms of quality which was prescribed in the contract. Now this is basically the doctrine of implied condition. Taylor versus Caldwell and subsequently other judgments, one famous of which is Henry versus Krell. In our law school days, we all have gone through this while studying torts. I believe many of us might recollect it now. All those decisions says that whatever the gaps are there in the contract, whatever terms are there which has not been specifically written, it is the reasonableness of the judge which should fill those gaps. So judge has to play a proactive role in implying what were the implied conditions of contract which were there in existence, which even though not specifically written or provided for in the contract, must be inferred for successful and fruitful performance of the contract. This is basically the law as on date in the UK jurisdiction. They still rely upon the doctrine of implied condition. Their law of frustration of contract is much more wider than that of in India in a limited sense. I'll explain why I say so. Now, while discussing the law in the UK jurisdiction, I have thought it appropriate to refer it to just three decisions which are of utmost importance. First is the C. Angel case, the famous C. Angel case, very oft quoted by the Supreme Court of India in the various judgments. One can find reference of the C. Angel case. Perhaps one of the leading decisions on this topic regarding frustration of contract. Now, in C. Angel case, the court says a multifactorial approach has to be taken into consideration. The entire purport of the contract. There has to be an analysis of allocation and assumption of risk. That is, how much risk has been allotted upon a party, how much risk a party has assumed upon himself. Now, in this parameter, one has to evaluate if a circumstances crop up. For example, today we are encountering this enormous, unprecedented epidemic. How an event of this nature affects the balance of allocation and assumption of risk. Now, in this context, the court has propounded the test of radical difference. Now, what is radical difference? Radical difference, the doctrine of radical difference, the test of radical difference is how different the situation was. Today, we enter into a contract, say in February 2020, 23rd of March, the lockdown comes into place. Subsequent to 23rd March, till the time the lockdown is in effect, how radical the situation has been, this has to be demonstrated by a party who would like to invoke the doctrine. This is the test of radical difference. Now, in this backdrop, one has to see whether the identity of the contract, the performances which was expected of a contracting party, and the performance in new circumstances after happening of an event which we claim to be an event of force majeure, whether there has been a break of identity. Now, this is very important. We will see a little later that even in 2017, the Supreme Court has highlighted on this particular factor while deciding the famous decision, the Energy Watchdog versus Central Electricity Regulatory Commission, Justice Rohinton Nariman's judgment. This was the criteria upon which Justice Nariman harped again and again. Text of radical difference and whether there was a break in identity. Now, we will take two decisions to demonstrate how these two cases were decided differently considering the facts and circumstances. Now, the first one is the Shariko glue. In this case, there was a agreement for supply of goods from Hamburg to Sudan. Now, if we just imagine the world map for a moment, we will understand that for global shipping routes, Suez Canal is a very important channel of navigation. Now, if Suez Canal does not exist, or if Suez Canal is encumbered by way of a strike or say a government intervention, a ship which is traveling to European countries upwards from Indian Ocean or say from the south to the north, they have to travel right below from Africa, Cape of Good Hope, and take a more circular route. Now, in this case, what had happened from Hamburg to Sudan, according to the contract, it was envisaged that the freight would travel via the Suez Canal. Now, for certain political disturbances, Suez Canal was closed. So the party has to take a roundabout route via the Cape of Good Hope, the southernmost point of the African continent. And accordingly, as a result thereof, the cost had doubled up. So the question came up whether by reason of closure of Suez Canal, by reason of doubling of the freight cost, whether the contract has frustrated. The court said no. Substantial rise of cost is not sufficient. When you know that you have to take a particular route, you must also know that there may be circumstances which can come up which can prevent you from taking that route. So just because there's a rise of cost, even though that's substantial, it cannot be said that it was sufficient to say that the contract has frustrated. Per contra, Peter Dixon and Sons Limited is a decision which has held that outbreak of First World War. Now, while going through case laws, while doing a little bit of research on this subject, I have found that Peter Dixon and Sons is perhaps the case which is closest to the enormous situation that has come up due to COVID-19. Such an enormous situation has not yet been dealt with in any of the decisions. One such enormous event like the COVID-19, which shook up the whole world, was maybe the First World War 19 and 19. Now, unprecedented disruption of trade due to First World War justifies frustration of this ground. Now, in this matter, one of the contracting parties took the ground that disruption of trade has happened due to First World War. There was a total shackling up of the supply chain. Goods cannot be procured. There was no manufacturing activity, nothing. So in this situation, on the context of the First World War, the court found that yes, there was a total change of circumstances. There was a radical change, as I had referred to earlier. There was a break in the identity of the contract and that of its performance. Accordingly, the doctrine of frustration was allowed on such circumstances. Now, coming to the Indian scenario, which is of much more importance to all of us, how Indian law deals with frustration of contract. Now we have two situations. One is section 31 and 32, which deals with contingent contracts, and section 56, which relates to performance of contract. Now, first of all, as a student of law, we must notice one thing, that contingent contract is something which is there in chapter 3. Section 56, which speaks about frustration due to impossibility of performance, that comes in chapter 4. Now, chapter 4 deals with performance of contract. Chapter 3 deals with a particular nature of agreement, that is contingent agreement. Now, 32 says that a contract becomes void as a result of the impossibility of a contingency, that a future uncertain event, which the parties were aware of at the time of entering into the contract and chose to make their contract contingent upon the happening of that future uncertain event. So this is basically what contingent contract is. Contingent contract basically says if the parties contemplate an event in the contract itself while executing the contract, if that event happens or does not happen, depending upon that contingency, if that contingency is a factor important for the performance of contract, and if that event happens or does not happen, depending upon that contingency, the contract may be rendered void. This is contingent contract. Important point is, while invoking section 31 and 32 contingent contract, one must note that the factor of contingent event, the event must be specified in the contract itself. If it is not there in the contract, if there something happens which was not contemplated in the contract itself, we come in to section 56, that is performance of contract. Is a different chapter. That is important. Now 56 refers to a contract becoming void as a result of impossibility of fundamental term or the fundamental basis of performance of the contract if it gets affected due to a supervening event or a impossibility or a impracticality. Section 56 comes into play. Now this is the difference between 32 and 56 is quite important, which will affect all of us when litigation starts to crop up from this issue, because the effect of 32 and 56 is different. I'll explain that in a while. Now, in the Indian context, when we talk about frustration of contract, our entire discussion will remain incomplete unless we refer to the seminal decision of Justice B.K. Mukherjee rendered in Satyabrata Ghosh, which I had referred to a little earlier. Now, Satyabrata Ghosh, in the Satyabrata Ghosh matter, I'll just give a snapshot of the facts. There was a plot of land which was to be developed by Mungiram Bangur & Company in and around the lake area in Calcutta. Now, there was an agreement entered into between one of the parties, of whom Satyabrata Ghosh was a nominee. Say Satyabrata Ghosh was also a party to it. Now, 1941, the Defense of India rules come into place. The government says, in 3 orders, the government says that the land which was supposed to be developed, which was a subject matter of the contract, that land was requisitioned by the government for military and other ancillary purposes. Now the developer, Mungiram Bangur & Company, says that prior to selling of the land, it was a condition that we will develop the land, we will build roads and pathways, etc., before conveying it to the respective vendors. Since by reason of the Defense of India rules, this work cannot be done, they gave an option to the purchasers that, see, this is what has happened, you take your money back or we won't be able to perform our contract. That cropped up into litigations. First, it started from the subordinate judge Alipur, as it then was in the 40s or early 50s, then came up in appeal, second appeal to the High Court and then to the Supreme Court. Now, Justice Mukherjee has, in this judgment, has laid down the entire foundation of the law of force majeure and the doctrine of frustration. Any discussion, any case law or any decision, even if we find, which we find in 2020, each one of us will find that Satyabrata Ghosh and Mungiram Bangur & Company has invariably been referred to. Justice Mukherjee says that the English law of frustration as it has developed there is inapplicable in India, because we have a specific statutory provision, that is section 56 and 32, which has to be resorted to. Since we have a statutory provision, the English rule of frustration is inapplicable in India. Justice Mukherjee further says that the word impossibility, as has been referred to in section 56, has to be taken in practical sense and not in a literal sense. The practicability of the entire circumstance has to be taken into account. Now, agreements containing implied or express terms regarding discharge upon happening or not happening of such event has to be dealt with section 32, which I had explained a little earlier. agreements containing implied or express terms regarding discharge. If an event has been contemplated in the agreement, 32 comes into place, which I had said just earlier. Surrounding evidence, this is very important. I will expect all of us to pay a little attention to this. Slightly technical, maybe some of us is aware of this. I found it very important. Surrounding evidence regarding belief, knowledge, and intention should be treated by the court to form an opinion, but not as a principle of constructing the contract, which has been done by the English courts. This is where the real difference between the English law and the Indian law lies. We have to take into account the circumstances, the contractual terms, everything. But that cannot be taken as a rule of constructing the contract itself. Now, you should remember that I have said while explaining the doctrine of implied terms that in the English court, the judges are under an obligation by virtue of their precedents and case laws that they must construct the contract in such a manner that there are something which is implied in the terms itself. But in Indian law, that is different. In Indian law, the surrounding evidence can be taken into account only to form an opinion as to whether such a situation has arisen which has rendered the contract impossible or impracticable to perform. Now, if and when frustration occurs, the dissolution of a contract is automatic. This is also very important. We know in cases of rescission of a contract, there are repudiation, there are breaches. One has to prove whether the contract has actually been repudiated, whether the contract exists or not. But when frustration as a ground is proved in a litigation, when the judge comes to a view or takes a view that frustration is proved, dissolution of a contract is automatic. There are no further consequences, nothing at all. The contract comes to an end. This is a very important aspect of the doctrine of frustration. Now, this is basically Satyabrata Ghosh and Mungiram Bangur and company. This basically explains the doctrine in detail. I will expect all of us at a later point of time. We must find some time to read the judgment in its entirety. It's a small one, just 7 pages. Now, this is where I would like to further highlight on the differentiation, because from a litigation point of view, this differentiation is of utmost importance. Now, there was a Madras High Court's decision which subsequently was carried to the Supreme Court. Now, these first 2 lines which I've mentioned in the slide, this is taken from the submissions of Mr. Soli Sorabji, senior advocate. While he was arguing the matter, he has put the distinction in his own terms in a different way. I liked it, so I picked the language. He says that section 32 is applicable when a contract dissolves by its own force by virtue of terms and conditions contained in it. That is, if the parties have contemplated some events, if it is recorded in the contract, if there is a specific force majeure clause in the contract which contemplates a particular event, section 32 comes in place. The contract dissolves by its own force, by virtue of its own terms and conditions. The difference in section 56 is when the contract crumbles down due to an external reason which is not contemplated in the contract. Now, this is important for us because COVID-19 was such an unprecedented event. The lockdown was such an event, a circumstance which was unprecedented, unheard of. So this must be interpreted as an event which is an external reason not contemplated in the contract. So in the context of COVID, we must look into in relying upon section 56 more rather than stretching the already existing force majeure clause, if any, in the contract. Once we do that, we will fall in the trap of section 32. Once we cannot do it, if we don't do it, if we can bring in section 56, it becomes more easier for us. We can interpret it as an external reason. Now, this discussion brings us to the inference that section 32 and 56 are different species of the same genus, which is referred to as frustration in English law. Now, to demonstrate this difference, I'll just refer to a few decisions like Gangasaran, 1952 Supreme Court. Now, here what has happened, there was a contract. One of the parties, it was mentioned that a particular cloth, bales of cloth was to be delivered, it was written as soon as supplied by a particular mill. That the name of the mill was specified in the contract. As soon as supplied by this particular mill, the goods will be supplied to X or Y, the second party to the contract. Now, something happens. There was a litigation. The Supreme Court says that mentioning of a particular textile mill was meant to provide a definite description of goods. It cannot be said that supply by that mill was an event or a condition which was related to performance of the contract. Court says that the mentioning of the mill was just to refer to a particular description of goods. Therefore, court said that section 32 is inapplicable because mentioning of a particular mill or that event, that when the mill supplies to me, I will supply to you. The mill didn't supply to me. Now that event was already there in the contract, but that event was not related to the performance of the contract. That's why the court says section 32 is inapplicable, because the event which has resisted the performance of the contract was something which was beyond the contract. Now, in contradiction, we would see the 2017 decision which I had referred to earlier. This is Energy Watchdog versus CRC. Existence here, Justice Nariman's judgment, here you will see that there was a existence of a specific force majeure clause in the contract, a specific clause which takes into account all the impossibilities, all the difficulties. The court says that section 56 is clearly inapplicable because 32 will come into play, because it's something which the contract has already contemplated. The matter relates to rise of price of coal which were to be imported from Indonesia to India. Accordingly, Adani Power had faced a severe financial loss for rise of the power tariff, etc., etc. That led to the this litigation. Similarly, this NAFED versus Alimenta, this was delivered on 20th of April. I acknowledge Mr. Jagriti Mishra here for referring or sending the judgment to me. Now, in this case, what had happened, there was a condition of importing of groundnuts. Alimenta is a foreign company. The court says that the export control orders, there was an export control order for which NAFED failed to supply or export the groundnuts to Alimenta. Now, the court says that the export orders of a government are liable to change from time to time. Now, if we enter into a contract for exporting something, it must be in contemplation that some government orders may come into force. And it was specifically mentioned in the contract that all the supply obligations are subject to the prevailing government orders or notifications. So the court said that this coming in force of a government order was very much within the contract, and accordingly, section 32 must be, section 32 was held to be applicable, not 56. Now, this having said that, these are the four very important decisions. For academic interest, I would request anyone who is interested, you can just have a look at these four decisions. This is Alopi Prasad, supply of ghee, rise of price. Court says that rise of price alone is not a ground for justifying frustration. Noihati Jute Mills is also a similar matter. If you are interested, you can go through it. Energy Watchdog I have already referred to. Durga Devi Bhagat is a Calcutta High Court judgment. I'll just briefly refer to this. This is very important. Durga Devi Bhagat says that there was a broker which was into a trade of linseed business. Now the broker enters into a contract or enters into a negotiation with a party in Calcutta. They enter into the negotiation for procuring linseed from the vendor in Calcutta and supplying it to a party in Finland. Now, there was again some disruption, some government orders which came into place. The linseed could not be procured by the broker, and in turn it cannot be supplied to the party in Finland. Now the broker comes into litigation. They say that by reason of not being able to supplying it to the vendor in Finland, we have suffered losses, you compensate us. The vendor in Calcutta says that I am not concerned whether you are going to supply it to Finland or whatever, or for your household use. We were not aware of this. This is your own matter. You said you want to procure from us. Due to this government order, we cannot supply this to you. Matter is. Now, the Calcutta High Court takes a different view. The Calcutta High Court says that supplying to Finland and procuring from the broker in Calcutta are two events which are closely interconnected. Once the linseed cannot be procured or cannot be supplied, the entire chain of trade breaks. And one event being dependent on another, it cannot be said that the both are two independent contracts. The court awarded compensation or damages on the ground of and did not accept the contention of frustration. Now, Durga Devi Bhagat also explains the difference between 32 and 56 in a very vivid manner. One must have a look at it if interested. Now, after the COVID outbreak, these are the two decisions which has come up. One by the Delhi High Court, the second one, Halliburton Offshore Services, is by the Delhi High Court. Standard Retail Private Limited is by the Bombay High Court. I couldn't find the citation, but anyone who is interested, you can Google it out, you will find it. Halliburton Offshore Services is a Section 9 application under the Arbitration and Conciliation Act. There was a bank guarantee. The bank, one of the parties wanted to invoke the bank guarantee. The other party who would have been affected by such invocation of bank guarantee came before the court and sought an injunction on a Section 9 application. On the ground that COVID outbreak is a enormous situation which has come up, doctrine of frustration, etc., was pleaded. Now, the court granted injunction, taking into account the entire enormity of circumstances. But the decision or injunction which has been delivered by the Delhi High Court is more on the principles of invocation of bank guarantee rather than the doctrine of frustration of contract. We know that there are two grounds on which invocation of bank guarantee is permissible. One is egregious fraud, second are special equities. The court went more into special equities in giving relief to the client rather than harping upon the doctrine of force majeure vis-a-vis the COVID outbreak. In Standard Retail Private Limited, the Bombay High Court rejected accepting the defense of the force majeure. It was a case of supply of steel. One of the parties pleaded that due to the lockdown and disruption in transportation services, this supply cannot be effectuated. Therefore, Standard Retail came before the court. Their ground of force majeure was not accepted. The court said that at the best, this is a case where there can be a rise in price. That cannot be a ground for invoking force majeure. We have already seen in Alopi Prasad also the price rise event was taken into consideration and rejected. And prior to that, we have also seen in Shadiko Glue the Suez Canal matter, where the court has also said that merely taking a roundabout route, thereby rise in freight cost, is insufficient to invoke the doctrine of force majeure and frustration of contract. So this is basically the outline of what the law is in existence in India. Now, therefore, we can see that even though there are many cases which has been discussed, deliberated, there are many judgments which I have researched, there are many judgments which you have gone through, all of you, in discharge of your professional functions. Now, I would say that COVID-19 and its effects are of such magnanimity, which had hardly been taken care of the Indian courts yet. I don't believe there had been any other event which was as serious or of as magnitude as this. So I don't really know when a litigation comes up how the court will take into account the effects of COVID while interpreting a contract and adjudicating a plea of force majeure taken by a party. But one thing is very clear, that the radical change test which has been accepted by the Supreme Court in Energy Watchdog is something which will be very important. One must demonstrate before the court now onwards that the effects of COVID has been such the interruption of supply chain, the disruption in the manufacturing sector, disruption of transportation services, complete standstill everywhere, economic standstill. So I believe the radical change test and the breaking of identity, the identity of the contract and the contemplated performance. Those two factors would be the most important factors in the coming days while adjudicating or taking a matter concerning force majeure. So this is where we are now. So I would now invite, I have unmuted all of you. So any questions in this regard? Anyone, if I have any questions, please. Or any points to add or anything which will, this will enrich all of us.
Wait and watch.
Yes, any questions from my friends? My friends, my seniors, my colleagues, anything. Please enrich me today. Sukandada, please.
Yes, am I audible?
Yes, Sukandada, you're audible, absolutely. Please.
Yes, I was just, I just want to know the impact of a force majeure clause in employer-employee relationship. If you just, your illustration is so much exhaustive, but this point may be taken care of regarding unemployment scenario of India is facing right now. So what is the impact of force majeure clause there?
See, unlike English law, force majeure is applicable in all kinds of contracts in India. Now, in this context, I will also add one thing. So far as agreements relating to land is concerned, force majeure is not applicable in England because of a different position there. But in India, it's applicable. So I believe in employment relation also, this will come into place. One of the, if any of the employer wants to plead force majeure as a ground of termination, I believe this will be a valid ground. Though I haven't looked into judicial decisions on this, maybe I'll explore this possibility also. For each one of us, we can do it and come to rescue of one another. I haven't looked into any judicial decisions on this, how whether this has at all been ever invoked in an employment contract.
Yes, there is no judicial decision so far as I.
Yes, that's what.
Thank you.
Yes, that's what Sukandada, that there are many things which will come up now which is not in our contemplation. So this is one aspect we have to look into.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, any other questions, clarifications, or anyone wants to add something which will enrich all of us, please. So that's all. Can we end it here, assuming that there are no further questions?
I have one point.
Yes, sir.
I have a question.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, this is Devashri. I'm from Digha. I'm basically. Am I audible? Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely, you're absolutely clear.
Yeah, I'm basically not from the fraternity that you belong to. I'm just a layman.
Yes, I
But this seminar, I just joined out of curiosity. And I must really appreciate the effort that you have taken. Because for a layman like me, I now have an idea that, okay, these are the things, Section 56, Section 32. Briefly, I have understood. So I must congratulate you. Thank you so much, and we look forward that you organize such things in future also.
But
And
one
reach out to a bigger crowd.
But one request: if you encounter a legal problem on this, please hire a lawyer. Don't go into the self-help group.
Of course, we have to do that. That's your profession, not ours. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Hello.
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 Yes, sir. You're audible. Please go ahead.
Hello, Mr. Ghosh.
Yes, sir.
I want to just process applicable in terms of finance agreement for the vehicle banks and the parties.
Sir, can you please specify the kind of agreements? Finance agreements, as in, are you referring to loan agreements or anything of that?
Loan agreements, vehicular loan.
Right. Now, sir, as I have already said that in India, Section 56 is applicable for each one of the classes of contract, irrespective of it being a financial agreement or anything of that sort. I believe, but Section 56 would be difficult to apply here, because in loan agreements, as far as my knowledge goes, there are already sufficient events which are contemplated in the agreement itself, which will absolve you of the liability to pay off. Now, I believe it would more of a case under Section 32 rather than Section 56. But in any event, sir, in so far as interpreting a loan agreement, I believe that the court would interpret it in a manner of limited impossibility rather than a blanket impossibility of performance. Because, sir, there are decisions, if we see that those decisions that the timeline envisaged for performance in a contract is very important. Now, if there is a contract which says that within 3 months these goods have to be supplied, now there it becomes a case of complete impossibility, because after 3 months the contract becomes, in any case, it becomes perhaps useless. But so far as finance or loan agreements are concerned, I believe it will be interpreted in a manner called limited impossibility, that the performance can be deferred for a time being, and after that it can again be performed. So I don't think there will be a blanket discharge of contract. At best it will be a limited discharge for the time being.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, because this Jagriti here.
Yes, sir. Please.
So we had a wonderful session, and we are so thankful to you for this high educational value content, and the presentation and everything else itself speaks of how dexterously built contents you have collected together and about your extraneous research. Now I think we should bring this to an end. And for every participant who are here and for everybody else who couldn't attend it today, we will have a link that we will share to you, so that just in case if you feel like revisiting the content, you can always have it. So we will share it, share with you a link of the YouTube channel wherein the entire this session that we had would be available. Thanks again, Vikram, for the highly enriched content.
Thank you, sir, for all the encouragement and making this possible. My heartiest thanks and regards to you. And my heartiest thanks to all the participants for making yourselves available. Hope this will invoke many thoughts in our minds, thereby making this a fruitful exercise. Thank you. Should I end this then? I'm calling it off now.
Right, sir.
Hello.